Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to this November 26th, 2013 edition of Nightcast. Tonight, we're going to open up with a story that relates to the second seal of Revelation, the red horse as it's depicted there, which Jesus Christ described in plain language as a horse and rider whose activities are war and rumors of war and world war, nation against nation and kingdom against kingdom. And tonight, a kind of serious story involving the United States. The United States has flown two B-52 military aircraft over disputed islands in the East China Sea in defiance of new Chinese air defense rules, officials say. China set up its air defense identification zone just 3 days ago, on Saturday, insisting that aircraft obey its rules or face emergency defensive measures. Johnny Diamond reports from Washington.
The action from the Chinese authorities over the weekend declaring, or self-declaring rather, an extended area of airspace to be what they called an airspace defense zone. And this is in the East China Sea, and it covers, as you mentioned, these disputed islands that are disputed by Japan and China. Immediately, the Secretary of Defense here in the US says that it was a destabilizing move, and essentially condemns it and makes it fairly clear the US is not going to respect China's request or demand that flights should file flight plans before going through that airspace. And then today, a couple of B-52 bombers in what the Pentagon says was a regular training mission took off from Guam, did the round trip, and went through this defense zone, this air defense zone which China has declared, without filing any flight plans, entirely unsurprisingly, with the Chinese authorities. So what you've really got is America saying, we don't recognize what you've done at the weekend, we're not going to pay attention to it, we're going to carry on doing just as we have before.
And friends, you know, if you've been watching the news daily since last year, and this goes even back further beyond that, China and Japan have had several rows over these disputed waters, the islands in the East China waters, seas out there. And there have been a number of events that have happened. And as China has been beefing up its military weaponry and its ships, and now even Japan, which is not supposed to maintain a military at all since World War II and the unconditional surrender of Japan there, and yet the United States kind of turns a blind eye as even Japan now is building its military and its weaponry and largely spinning off of this island dispute. And now the United States is kind of involved in it, and has been and should have been in a way involved with it, but decided some months ago during one of the rows between China and Japan to say, in spite of our World War II agreements, we're, hands off between you two on that. I'm just summarizing the effect of what's happened there. So this, even though the United States wants to say, we're not going to yield to that, this could turn nasty in the future. So it is something to keep abreast of in the news and to even be praying about for the good of the United States, that the freedoms we have had and the liberties we've had may continue until God decides that whatever religious freedoms He's wanted us to have for the purposes He wanted us to have them until God decides he needs them no more. We need to be praying that some of these type of events won't escalate into something that undermines a lot of that kind of thing. That undermines our freedoms until God is ready to allow them to be relinquished. 9 people are believed to have been killed after heavy snow. Now talk about China. 9 people are believed to have been killed after heavy snowfalls in China caused a building to collapse in one of the provinces in northeast China. Elsewhere, the snow is continuing to cause traffic disruption, flight cancellations, and school closures. And in the United States, we've lost 8 or 9 people over this west to east storm that's even moving now again eastward. And boy, are we feeling the cold here from where our studios are located in Alabama. But on this report from China, with the snowstorm there where 9 people have been killed, Miranda Hurst has this report from China.
Part of a 3-story factory in Mudanxiang City reduced to rubble by the sheer weight of snow on its roof. 9 workers died in the collapse, according to local media. Elsewhere, the roofs of these factory buildings were also brought down, burying machines and other equipment inside. Some traffic is getting back to normal after heavy snowfall overnight, but not all drivers were so lucky. Snow in some places was knee-deep, trains delayed, and flights disrupted as runways disappeared under the snow. The government raised the snow warning from orange to red alert on Monday, but the weather is forecast to be dry and cold for the next few days, with no heavy snowfalls expected. Miranda Hurst, BBC News.
And friends, several sinkholes in the past number of months have been in the news, and there's one in the news today from a Bosnian village where residents of Seneca have been left shocked after a sinkhole swallowed up their village pond overnight. The pond was about 20 meters in width, that's almost 66 feet wide, and 8 meters deep, which is a little over 26 feet deep. But the sinkhole, which villagers are calling the abyss now, is around 50 meters wide and 30 meters deep. That's roughly 164 feet deep by 100 feet deep. And it's still growing. Gita Guru Murthy reports from Bosnia.
To Bosnia quickly, and local residents of a remote village were left shocked after the sudden disappearance of their local pond. The waters of the pond disappeared last week when a sinkhole formed, swallowing up trees and vegetation, as well as sucking in fish.
Okay, and big sinkhole. Well, the decision by the Ukrainian president to halt a trade deal with the EU is in the news again today, and has sparked, over the past several days, has sparked mass protest in the capital, Kiev, and the proposed prospect of improved relations with Russia. Russia has been accused of exerting heavy economic pressure on the Ukraine to reject the EU's economic advances. Steve Rosenberg reports from Kiev.
At the Kiev Opera, it's a story of love and bitter rivalry. 2 suitors, 1 fair maiden. It's just like the story of Ukraine. 2 world powers, the European Union and Russia, have been competing for closer ties with Kiev. But whom would she embrace?
Ukraine has had a big decision to make. On the one hand, should it sign an historic trade agreement with the European Union that would turn this country very much towards Europe? Or should it look east and join Russia's economic bloc? The pressure on Ukraine to decide one way or the other has been huge.
That includes economic pressure. Earlier this year, Russia banned imports from Ukraine's largest confectioner, Roshan, and imposed trade restrictions on other Ukrainian companies. A strong hint that Kiev should think twice before distancing itself from Moscow.
The whole world is absolutely clear, understand that the real reason is political reason. It's a form of pressure on Ukraine because of the necessity to making a strategic decision about our future development.
But that pressure has had an effect. Last week, Ukraine's government announced it had put on hold the association agreement with the EU. It would concentrate instead on repairing economic ties with Moscow.
Over
the last year, trade between Russia and Ukraine fell by 25%. That's a huge blow to our economy. We spoke to EU officials months ago about how they might compensate us. But all we got were declarations that Ukraine would profit in the medium to long term.
The government's decision has sparked anger on the streets. In Kiev, pro-EU protesters have clashed with riot police. They accuse the authorities of dragging Ukraine back to the Soviet Union and demanded the release from jail of opposition leader and former Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko.
The ruling party are not willing to embrace European standards and values. They're not willing to play according to the rules of European Union.
These protesters say they will stay on the streets until Ukraine's government chooses a different path, one that leads to Europe. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Kiev.
And friends, news from Scotland. Scottish First Minister Alex Salmond has launched his government's independence blueprint, along with his deputy Nicola Sturgeon, describing it as a mission statement for the future. The BBC's Alan Little reports on the likely implications of an independent Scotland ahead of a referendum next September.
For nationalists, the campaign has moved into an ambitious new phase. The most significant milestone to date on the long march to independence, and the first detailed account of the character, shape and spirit of the new nation they hope will soon be born.
An independent Scotland could have the 8th highest economic output and the 10th highest national income per head of population in the whole of the developed world.
So what would an independent Scotland look like? It would be a kingdom with the Queen as head of state. It would join NATO, but demand the removal of submarine-borne Trident nuclear missiles within 4 years. And it would keep the pound as part of a sterling zone with the rest of the United Kingdom.
This is not a final blueprint for independence. It's simply the Scottish Government's starting point for an 18-month period of negotiations after a yes vote. And it rests on a lot of assumptions. It assumes, for example, that the EU will accept Scotland as a continuing rather than as a new member, that NATO will accept a nuclear-free Scotland without Trident, and that the UK government will agree to share the pound with an independent Scotland in a currency union.
And what if the UK government refused to share the pound? Then an independent Scotland, Alex Salmond told me, might refuse to share Britain's national debt.
Well, these things follow as night follows day. That Scotland, we've indicated the willingness in this document that we'll accept the financing of some of the massive obligations and liabilities that have been built up by Alistair Darling and now George Osborne. But of course that is predicated on a share of assets. You have to share both sides of the balance sheet. And one of these assets is sterling and the Bank of England.
This is a country of two national identities interwoven. Many here are genuinely torn. But opponents of independence say Alex Salmond's blueprint is mere wishful thinking.
He's got nothing new to say. What he simply does is to repeat the assertions and claims he's been making for years. He says there will be a currency union. He ignores the fact there would have to be a negotiation, and in a negotiation you don't get everything you want. It takes two and they've got to reach agreement. Same with Europe. The idea that 27 European countries are going to roll over and give him whatever he wants, that's nonsense.
But there is a danger in this line of attack. For pro-independence campaigners see this as a battle between the sunlit promise of a new start and the fearful caution of the status quo. Might that yet swing it? Alan Little, BBC News in central Scotland.
Friends, in our next video, we've got a little 60-second explanation as the Scottish government prepares to publish a white paper which has been described as a blueprint for independence. Laura Bicker explains how the referendum is going to work, and her explanation given in this 60-second video.
The Scottish Government is setting out what an independent Scotland could look like, including how it will raise taxes, create a defence force, and whether it will still be part of the EU. Scots will go to the polls on Thursday the 18th September next year. There are two campaigns: Yes Scotland, backed by the SNP and the Scottish Greens, and Better Together, backed by Labour, the Conservatives and the Lib Dems. People living in Scotland are eligible to vote, and Scots in the armed forces overseas, but not Scots living in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Also, for the first time in any UK poll, Scots aged 16 and 17 will be able to vote. The question being asked is, should Scotland be an independent country? The voting options are straightforward: yes or no. Independence would happen on the 24th of March 2016.
Okay, there's the 60-second explanation. And friends, that red horse, put our chart back up on the screen just for a moment. The second seal of Revelation, the red horse, is running rampant in Central Africa. The Central African Republic has been in a state of chaos since rebels seized power in March, ousting President Francois Bozize. Nick Bryant reports from Africa.
Few countries are of more concern to UN diplomats right now than the Central African Republic, which is sliding into complete chaos and lawlessness. Earlier this month, the UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon said communal violence in the landlocked country risks spiralling out of control. Now his deputy, Jan Eliasson, has described the security situation as being in virtual meltdown.
The country faces a desperate security situation. There is a breakdown of law and order. The population is enduring suffering beyond imagination. And as we see far too often, children and women are at the gravest risk. The use of child soldiers is rising, sexual violence is growing.
Civilians were enduring suffering beyond imagination, he told the UN Security Council, including sexual violence, extortion, torture, summary executions, and unprecedented sectarian violence between Muslims and Christians.
The Secretary-General is particularly concerned over the alarming increase in intercommunal violence. Traditional harmony among communities has been replaced by polarization and widespread horror.
With the country becoming a breeding ground for extremists and armed groups, Mr. Eliasson warned that there was really only one choice for a United Nations peacekeeping operation to try to restore order.
And friends, the first seal of Revelation, the white horse, which Jesus Christ described as beware of false Christ, false apostles, deception in religion. Don't let anybody deceive you. Makes the news tonight. In today's news, Pope Francis has called for power in the Catholic Church to be devolved away from the Vatican in the first major work he's written in the role. The BBC's David Wiley reports on the Pope's desire for a greater zeal among the members of the Catholic flock in spreading the gospel. Now, I see that I don't have the right video up on the screen, so let me put our slide back up here while I try to remedy this. Okay, actually, I do have the correct slide up on the screen. or did have. Okay, here's that story related to the white horse.
It's really a sort of compendium of what he's been saying in his almost daily homilies for the past 8 months. He's had time now to, as it were, codify his blueprint for the future of the Catholic Church. And I find the most interesting part the fact that he doesn't want to continue to have the Vatican as the centre of the Roman Catholic Church. As you quoted this phrase, go out in the streets and not be afraid of getting your shoes dirty. That's his blueprint for the future, for the missionary future of the Church. He tells people that I think he wants to see a greater zeal among the members of the 1.2 billion Catholic flock in spreading the gospel and in spreading it not in terms of Pope speak, but in terms of simple charitable thoughts, particularly, as he says in this document, for the world's poor. He says the modern societies are very unjust. He has personal knowledge of the injustices in the slums and shanty towns of Buenos Aires, and he takes cognizance of the fact that basically the Roman Catholic Church henceforth has to be the church of the developing world, the world in which there are many, many poor people and very, very few wealthy people who seem to control the economic strings of the world. And he wants to see a more just society in which the church is pulling its weight and telling people in no uncertain language that these injustices are not morally permissible in the 21st century.
Okay, friends, and we're going to end on a little bit of a light note tonight. Seahorses are known to be notoriously bad swimmers. They're not fast and so on, but they have a little secret advantage. This video from Brad Jamil of the University of Texas at Austin explains. Okay, well, that was it. I thought there would be some commentary with that, friends, so let me back that up. I want us to end on a nice, light, enjoyable note tonight. With this extreme cold weather that's come in, crossing the country, I'm sure many of you have been perhaps suffering with it, and I've been struggling against a cold or flu with various symptoms for the past several days, and I've been very much weakened by it today. And when I wrap up the show tonight, I'm going to do what I have to do and try to hit the sack real early this evening. But I do want to end on something light, and let me start this again. This is kind of a fun video that was in today's news, and let me knock something out of the way here that's about to shut off our broadcasting computer. There we go. Okay, here's the video on the seahorse. Let's roll this and bring it forward. Now, seahorses are famously poor swimmers, but they have a secret weapon which allows them to sneak up on their prey undetected. Their peculiar snouts are shaped to create very few ripples in the water, effectively cloaking them as they creep up and pounce on crustaceans. A new study has found, and that study produced, as a result, this video by Brad Jamil of the University of Texas at Austin. Friends, that's it for this edition tonight, this Tuesday night edition of Nightcast. God willing, and the creek don't rise and this cold and flu don't knock me out, I appreciate those of you who've been praying for me. I got some wonderful relief from the room spinning the other day, or yesterday morning, and it was keeping me from getting out of bed for several hours yesterday morning. So thank you for those prayers. That has helped me tremendously. And again, God willing, and the creek don't rise, we'll be back again tomorrow night, Wednesday evening, for another half-hour edition of the current day's news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Until next time, your host Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth saying, so long, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.